Going to go ahead and call this May 15th meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for attending in person. We're also meeting remotely via Teams, so welcome to those that are not in attendance here physically this evening. We will start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Eddie, do you mind leading us? Now we have some special guests that are going to join us in chambers. Tony.
Whoever pays you guys, and make sure you get a raise next year, because we're going to keep Winter Carnival going for 65 more years. We're going to have Oktoberfest, and we're going to keep having fun. And Mr. Canal, we're going to keep it gritty for a long time. So, without further ado, come on up, Court. I would like to recognize some people that do a heck of a lot for our city. Not you guys. But some of the people out here, and the people that do the really hard work, the people that have to put up with the people and our citizens when maybe we grow really fast, or there's a pandemic, or, you know, the simple stuff that we deal with in the realm. So, who I would like to see come forward and present yourselves in front of our king and queen. Can I please have Dave Taylor, Craig Workman, and Michelle Hauk, please present yourself before your king. I know. That's how it works. All right. Lady and gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, please kneel before your king. This is the royal kneeler, and we have our pillows of kneeling as well. We're going to try to save some time. Michelle gave me about 15 minutes to get this done. So in prime Whitefish fashion, we might be here an hour and a half.
Your fashion.
For all whom these presents may come, greetings, and let it be known and published throughout the realm in recognition of a special service to our court and for ennobled striving in furthering the welfare of this kingdom. I'm going to start with Craig Workman. Shall be entitled to all due homage, special emoluments, and appertaining to his newly exalted position. Now, therefore, we do proclaim and decree, he shall be now and forthwith known as Chief Leaf Sucker Upper. Thanklessly tasked with trying to titillate every taxpayer, listening lucidly, letting localities lead themselves, purifying and protecting wastewater and watershed, tirelessly taming tiger for true love. Also, we have Dave Taylor, keeper of cool construction. OG originator of opulent offices and other builds. Finding, fishing, and frolicking in the forest fun. Father and brother to those present and past. Member of mischievous musical minions in Whitefish. And Michelle Hauk, lifelong Whitefish public page. Feverishly fanatical about her founding family. Granddaughter of royal penguin parentage. Career citizen clerk and customer confidant, and many Montana moments made meandering via motorcycle. Now raise, noble subjects. Rise and go forth and conduct yourself as a liege of the realm. King of Prime. Nice job. Thank you for being here. Thank you. I got mine too. Thanks, man. I wanted to stay. Okay, our next round, because there's so many people that we'd like to recognize. May I still now see Angie Jacobs, Bridger Kelch, and Joe Page. Please come present yourself before your king as first responders to Whitefish. Remember, our theme this year for Winter Carnival was celebrating fire and ice first responders. So here they are. And I know that Bridger's been knighted a couple times, but he didn't give me too much crap about my car at the Moose Lodge after the Merrymaker. So just a day or two, it's fine. All right. For all whom these presents may come, greetings, and let it be known and published throughout the realm in recognition of a special service to our court, and for ennobled striving in furthering the welfare of this kingdom. Angie Jacobs shall be entitled to all due homage, special emoluments, and
hereditaments
appertaining to her newly exalted position. Now, therefore, we do proclaim and decree that she shall be now and forthwith known as changing pages, Angie Jacobs, beautiful barrister of badassness. Frenchtown native graduating from Hippie Haven, mother of monstrous teen, mentor to many, meanderer of mountains, marrying a manly man, most momentous life event, protecting the realm from frivolous faucet lawsuits. And next, we have Bridger Kelch, OG Popo of the Fish. U.S. Army veteran valiantly serving, inchoate and kind kindergarten cop, friendly first responder, fabulous father to Mason and Camry, forever friend to Stacy, fancies family, fish finding, firing fancy clays, and flathead frolicking. And Joe Page, Chief Bucket Brigade Budgeter, firstly responding to emergencies existing and ersatz, feverishly finding fancy fire trucks for royal festivals, managing meticulously false alarms and fall downs, living largely loving his local Lifesavers League. Now rise, noble subjects, go forth and conduct yourself as liege of the realm. Get a prime. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Miss Angie, Mr. Joe, King of Prime. Doesn't get you much other than just a lot of cred downtown. And we have one left. Will Dana Smith please come forth and present herself before our king? We're going to do this one more time. For all whom these presents may come, greetings, and let it be known throughout the realm, and in recognition of a special service to our court, and for ennobled striving in furthering the welfare of this kingdom. Dana Smith shall be entitled to all due homage, special emoluments, and
Agradecements.
appertaining to her newly exalted position. Now, therefore, we do proclaim and decree that she shall be now and forthwith known as Masterful Manager of Montana Mecca. Californicated res runner relishing in the realm, following father's fortitude for firearm targets, lovingly and proudly keeping Clara the center of her universe. Charcuterie champion, heroic hiker, and creepy-ass mountain goat avoider. Now rise, noble subject. Go forth and conduct yourself as a liege of the realm. All right. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Thank you for having us here. Again, continue your duties. Oh, keep the realm gritty, Canal. Okay, and just letting everybody know, Lilac Festival in Spokane this weekend. We'll be there representing the realm as well as we can. We will be the loudest float there, and then we have 4th of July parade in Big Fork as well. So that's on the 4th of July over in Big Fork. We'll be on that one. So thank you for having us. Thank you for keeping the realm cool, and we appreciate everybody in here.
Thanks, you guys. Awesome thing.
Good job. Way to go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no. Anyway. I was kind of psyched for that. I told Julian. Yeah. No. We'll move back to our agenda, and we're on to item 4, communications from the public. We do have one public hearing advertised for this evening, so if you're here to speak to that public hearing, please wait until I call that item. Otherwise, if you have anything to bring to the attention of the council, now would be your opportunity. Richard, nothing tonight? Michelle, anyone online? Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public comment period. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Not seeing any, we'll move on to our consent agenda. You do have the minutes from both the regular and special sessions from May 1st. Can I have a motion for approval?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Cornell. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, which brings us quickly to our one public hearing of the night, which will be ordinance number 23-8. I will not bother reading the entire 2 paragraphs, but this is related to amending the Whitefish City Code to completely rewrite Title 11, Chapter 4 of our landscaping requirements. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Alan Tiefenbach, Long Range Planner with the City of Whitefish. Waiting for Michelle to cue it up here. So this is a complete update to the City of Whitefish's landscaping code. Hang on a second. Okay, next slide, please. So the last time any revisions occurred to this chapter were in 2008. Updates to the landscape code have been discussed by council since at least 2017, and they were listed as a 2022 city council goal. What is being proposed tonight is a significant change from the existing code. Michelle. Oh, thank you. So staff reviewed the landscaping regulations for 7 different Montana municipalities. 6 cities in the Northwest, 5 city and county governments in Colorado, several of which I worked for, and several other cities with robust landscaping regulations. Staff reviewed these existing regulations, reconstructed and rewrote them, had 5 internal meetings with various departments, and then sent this draft to 12 different landscape firms and arborists that were familiar with whitefish and Montana flora in general. Staff also brought this to the Planning Board and the City Council during work sessions in February of this year. Move on, please, Michelle. The code was completely rearranged to make it flow and to read more logically. That's why the red marks you have are all red marks. One side is all crossed out, and then all the rest are complete red marks because it was too much to try to show you how much it actually changed. The basic landscaping requirements were reorganized into tables at the front. This is so they could be assessed more easily. Most people, when they're getting in the landscape code, they're just trying to find simple basics. So that's why we put them in the tables, put them towards the front. Next, please. The new landscaping requirements apply to everything except for single-family detached. The present ones that are existing right now, they exempt single-family detached duplexes and triplexes. So the new ones would only exempt single-family detached. There are new requirements for residential buffers, street frontages, and internal parking lot islands. The parking lot islands and the frontages are not right now required. It added a 30-foot buffer along US 93. That was one of the recommendations of the US 93 South Corridor Plan. So we've brought that into the landscape code. There's description requirements for percentages of landscaping. There are landscaping requirements that are based on new performance standards. So the existing code has some square footages that we're not really sure where those square footages came from. They don't match any of the minimum lot sizes or in acreages. Instead, the new landscape code has performance standards. So basically based on length of frontages, based on length of property lines, those kinds of things. Much of what this involved, and that's why the description is so long, was moving many of the different landscape requirements of other sections into this code. So staff went through all of our existing regulations and found anything that had to do with landscaping, and those were being deleted out of those chapters and brought into this, so it's much easier to find them versus all over the place. The existing code has the minimum tree density requirements in it. If you ever try to read it, it's very difficult to try to figure out how to implement. Well, we were looking to find a simpler approach that would be easier to implement and easier to understand. We looked at the tree requirements for more than 20 different municipalities. The new requirements identify evergreen trees with calipers greater than 12 inch, deciduous trees with calipers greater than 6 inches, and other trees that are determined as significant trees. The landscape code calls these qualifying trees. There's some requirements of how it works, but basically each qualifying tree that's removed must be replaced with trees totaling at least 2 times the caliper inches. So if you take out one, you have to replace it with 2. And I'll talk in a minute, there are some exceptions to that. We had to build some flexibility into this. Also, if you keep any of those qualifying trees, then it's credited towards 2 trees. So if you save a qualifying tree, then it's credited towards you having to put in 2 trees, although you can't go them more than 50%. So you can't save all your trees and basically not have to do any landscaping. As I mentioned, there's a allowance for relief from this requirement, particularly because of some of the heavily forested lots here in Whitefish. The landscape code talks about that sometimes it's understood that removal of trees is necessary, particularly for fire mitigation. That was one of the discussions that we talked about. Because the landscape code includes merging existing requirements. So sorry, Michelle, could you move it forward to slide 7? There you go, thank you. Because the new landscape code includes merging existing requirements from other sections, if the new code is implemented, then other sections would have to be updated accordingly, and all those sections were included and given to you. The majority of this, as I mentioned, includes deleting existing landscaping requirements from other sections as they're being moved in. Some of them are just deleted because they're duplicative. Some of these code sections just have references to the landscape code instead of having it in there. So again, as I mentioned, we've included the updated regulations with you. Staff brought this proposed regulatory update to the Planning Board and the City Council during work sessions in February. Overall, both were supportive of the new regulation. There were some minor comments that both had. One of them was questions about how tree valuation would be determined, which I think that's going to be a non-issue, and I'll come back to that one. They were supportive of the tree preservation, but believed that there should be some exemptions for fire mitigation, which was actually a very helpful. So we had to go back and we talked to the fire chief a little bit about this, and I'll circle back on that. A council person suggested that there should be additional clarification regarding what's an acceptable root barrier, which has been included into the new regulations. There was a council person that directed staff to make revisions to the residential buffer standards to require that the residential buffer have a 50% visual screen at least 5 feet in height, so we did include that into the new regulations. There was a citizen that made a comment about whether or not it would be difficult to have the 50% native species requirement. There was some discussion about that, and some landscape architects also had the same concerns. The solution that was recommended to us was to allow cultivars, which are basically hybrids of native, and those are much easier to get. The landscape architects were all in favor of that, so that's the way to resolve that. There was also a comment about whether or not there should be a footnote added with the cost of a tree in case a tree had to be removed. We talked about that, but we didn't want to put anything having to do with costs into the regulations. First of all, because it's a regulation and you have to completely change the regulation to remove it. Secondly, because it's very difficult to try to figure out how that tree cost would be. Plus, as you have seen just over the last 2 years, prices can vary just so significantly that it wouldn't have been helpful. Staff brought this proposed landscaping code back to the planning board on April 20th, and the planning board only had a few general questions, and this was really about the process, about how relief could occur from the tree retention standards and what safeguards there could be. They unanimously supported this. Since this time, today at 3:30, staff received a letter that had some comments and some concerns about the landscape code. I'm understanding that you all received that letter. Just a couple of minor things. There was some comments about whether these regulations were more like regulations or were more like subdivision covenants. It's important to note that if you Google any city's landscape codes, you'll find that they're very similar to what you're seeing here tonight. So these are very standard. They were tailored for the city, and again, we looked at more than 20 different cities to come up with this. There were some comments about whether the tree removal policies or some of the landscape code would have an impact on housing, which was certainly something we looked at, but if you look in the code, there is actually a reference in there that talks about that there can be relief granted when these basically cause a hardship, and one of the things it talks about is for community housing. We were very careful that we wanted to make sure there was some flexibility. Anytime, as you know, as soon as you pass a regulation, the first person that comes in usually doesn't match the regulation, and then you're trying to figure out how to make it work. So we wanted to make sure that there was enough flexibility, that the intent of these happened, but it gives you the ability that when you're showing your landscaping plan, if you don't think that you can meet it, if you have to take a tree out, if you have to provide some mitigation, you have to move it, you can demonstrate why you can't do this. The one last comment that they talked about was some language about whether or not a taking was occurring, removing the tree, and there was some case law, and I could defer it to our attorney if she wanted to go more into that. However, it's important to mention that we're not making people. When people come in to do these landscape plans, to use this landscape code, what we're asking them to do is to indicate on the landscape plan the trees that they're going to preserve. The ones that they can't preserve or they can retain, then again, they can work with staff to show what their solutions are. But once you've shown that you're going to preserve a tree, and that tree is going to be retained or preserved, then you're not supposed to cut that tree down. There was some language that was initially in here, and there's going to be 2 revisions that I'm actually going to recommend tonight. The first one was actually just a typo, and that was my mistake. And if you look in the front, it would be 11-4-1. Instead of saying mitigation or reduce the impacts of climate change, it should just say mitigate. Again, that was just a typo. The bigger thing I should talk about is at the end, and that's in 11-4-9 in administration. And it's in D, in enforcement. And this comes back to what that comment was about in that letter today about whether or not there was a taking. In here, it talks about unlawful removal of a qualifying tree designed in the tree preservation plan will either result in a municipal infraction or a fine equal to, and there's a whole bunch of language. Talked to the city attorney about this today, and I think that this probably should have been discussed. Early on, it was just missed, basically, but her recommendation is to just strike that whole thing. So it would say unlawful removal of a qualifying tree designated in the tree preservation plan for retention will result in a municipal infraction. And not have anything about the cost in there. And again, that would pertain to trees that are indicated on the plan by the applicant that they're saying they're going to preserve. So someone, I think we all know sort of an example of a situation where there were trees that were promised to be preserved that were cut down. So that is one of the things that this is intending to prevent. So again, the staff recommends approval. Planning board recommended approval with the 2 revisions. Again, fixing the typo on the first page, changing mitigation to mitigate, and to change the language in 11-4-9D to just have it say municipal infraction and not all the rest of the language about the fee. And with that, I would stand for any questions or comments, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Alan. Great work on this. Any questions for Alan on his staff report or the proposed amendments? Ben and then Rebecca.
Since there are so many prescriptive requirements in this new code, could you just kind of talk me through what the process would be if an applicant would like a variance of some sort?
So, yes, sir, we can do that. So originally, we actually had some language that was more like a variance language in this, where you had to really kind of prove some hardship, and it was approved by the Director of Planning and Building. It was later determined that we probably didn't want to have Dave spending his time trying to approve every tree that was going to be added or removed. If you look in section 11-4-6, which is tree retention, it talks about that the city recognizes that tree removal is sometimes necessary, and it gives you a whole list of these different things. And what it says is when it's considered impractical or the trees can't be retained or replaced, then they have the ability to show that for whatever reason it's impractical, it's costly, they can't design, it's not reasonable. And when we talk about reasonable, the code talks about that you can't just say, well, I can't get my maximum density and that's why I want to have the tree removal. But at the time of the landscape plan, if the applicant cannot design for some reason to save a tree, for instance, then the applicant can show us that they're going to plant a tree somewhere else. Or maybe they'll add a little more of a buffer on one side. Or maybe they'll screen the headlights on one side. So the intent of this is to try to get to the same end without being overly prescriptive. Because again, flexibility is super important in code. Otherwise, you're just always trying to grant variances from it.
Agree. And so the zoning administrator can approve those variance requests.
Or their designee, meaning that when Nelson or Wendy are looking at the code and they bring it in the staff meeting, say, applicant said they can't save this tree because they want to bump this building out here, but they promise that they're going to buffer the parking lot a little more here with more density, staff and go, yeah, that's a good alternative.
Thank you.
Rebecca.
Yep. I just was wondering, I'm comfortable with our zoning administrator making decisions, but one question I had was, the arborists are involved in this, that work under Parks and Rec. Are they the ones that go to the sites to set the tree standards and make sure that the mitigation around the trees is correct, or is that hired? But, oh, it is hired.
Yes, ma'am. It says that they have to actually the applicant has to have a licensed arborist, describe which trees would be preserved and how that would be done.
Okay, so our Parks and Rec department is not involved in this at all? It will all go through planning and building?
Yes, ma'am. Although if there
Okay.
was something that was particularly difficult, we would probably refer it to one of our arborists to see if she agreed.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea when you get stuck, because they
Yes, ma'am.
sure know a lot, and they love trees.
Yes, ma'am. We didn't want to burden our arborists with
I
more
know,
work.
that, I was kind of worried about that because they're pretty busy, but, okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Further questions for Alan? Frank.
Ellen, I mean, again, it's a pretty prescriptive routine, and I know you pulled it together from a lot of other places within our code and elsewhere. My question is, there doesn't seem to be a lot of provision in here for us to allow for the use of anything other than evergreen or an aspen tree? What about any hardwood trees? What about the fact that we might want some more flowering or coloring to our landscape than just greens and greens?
This basically says that you should plant 50% of your species has to be native, and it says evergreen or deciduous. So it doesn't say that you have to plant evergreen. It says if you plant a deciduous tree, it has to be at least 6 inches in diameter. If you plant or 6 inches in diameter, if you plant a evergreen, or I probably have it backwards, but there's an inch minimum on caliper on the trees, but it does allow you to plant evergreen or deciduous trees. You can choose. It does say that 50% of your landscaping should be native to Montana or should be cultivars of a native species.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, did you have a question?
My only question is, what about people that have planted their own trees and then maybe their property use changes? Is there any consideration for somebody who's maybe had trees that they planted 20 years ago that now they're going to take down because they're going to change they're going to develop their property to the fullest extent possible? Is there anything like that? Or is it just the landscape plan that has to dictate?
I didn't understand the question, sir. I'm sorry.
Well, there's a chance that some people have planted trees on their property that were not there when they bought the property.
Correct.
And now maybe they're going to develop their property to a greater extent.
Correct.
Is there any accommodation for that, or is that just something that you would work out with the zoning
Yes, sir.
administrator?
So when they would come in, their landscape plan would show the trees that were existing on the site at that time. We're not quite enough technology to be able to have all the trees that have been planted. I'm not that good with GIS yet. That's a lot of work. I mean, I can go out, if you really want me to go out there and pinpoint all the trees on the GIS, I will, but.
No, that's
you'll get
not
it
what I'm
somewhere.
asking. Never mind, it's okay.
But yes, sir, the landscape plan will take care of that.
Further questions for Alan? Ben?
There was one sentence in here that stuck out to me, and it says, it's under the tree section, and it says, an inability to achieve the maximum permitted density or building envelopes by complying with this subsection is not in itself considered to prevent development.
Yes, sir.
Why is that sentence in there? And I guess the reason why I'm asking is, let's say you have a lot with barely any trees on it, for example, and you want to build a building somewhere. Are there scenarios where this code is not going to allow you to build the project you want to build because of the existing tree or trees?
Again, I think the whole intent of this paragraph is that you're demonstrating reasonable use of the property. If this is not intended to say that if you want to max out your density and you want to take out a qualifying tree, that's one thing. If you want to have reasonable use of the property and develop and you have to cut some trees down, add some trees somewhere else, it's intended to provide the maximum flexibility. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not. There's a very tenacious balance between trying to make it a regulation and have enough flexibility. If you go too soft, then you can't enforce it. If you go too hard, then nobody can be able to do anything. So there was always a balance of trying to provide enough rigidity that there's some predictable development, that this is what the requirements are. But if you really genuinely show that you can't reasonably design your site, you can't fit some housing, our requirements say you have to put in parking, and your parking is you can't put in your parking if you don't cut down a tree or something like that, it's reasonable that you can ask for an exemption from that. You can't say, I don't want to put in this tree. I want to cut down. I want to cut down this 100-year-old tree because it's blocking my view. That's what this is trying to prevent.
So is there a scenario where, I'm not saying this is wrong, but is there a scenario where a developer cannot build the project they would like to build because of the tree retention requirements, presuming that the developer would be willing to replant any number of trees in different locations?
Are you saying, would this ever prohibit development completely?
Well, or
Certain type of.
yes, or the ideal development that would be coming forward.
This is not intended for that. I mean, it's pulling out a crystal ball and trying to go through every scenario I can't do, but this is not intended to do this. This is intended to let people develop and in the same time have to take into account the trees and be able to describe at the time of development why they have to cut the trees down.
Sure, which I agree with, but doesn't that sentence, like the ability to achieve the maximum permitted density, isn't that kind of saying something different? That if you can't build, if we are limiting the property rights of that person to build what they want to build,
Because of a tree?
yeah, because of the tree, I mean, isn't it saying something different?
The intention of this, and if that's not the intention that you're hearing, certainly it's in your purview to change this. The intention of this is not be trying to get your maximum build out as a reason. The intent of this is so that you can't say, I can't achieve the maximum build out unless I get to take out this 100-year-old tree. That's what this intent is. If it doesn't read that way for you, certainly you having some building experience, you could change it or remove it.
I mean, I guess as long as there's always an option to have built-in flexibility with the zoning administrator, then presumably it doesn't matter. Is
We
that
have
fair?
no intent of trying to stop or limit development. What we are trying to do is to be able to have a dialogue with the applicant about the importance of trees in the city, and if they have to take out trees, having to provide some kind of solution. Whether it's better buffering on one side, saving trees on another side, it gives us some negotiation power to be able to get a better product.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca.
Yep. Alan, was looking up your revisions that you wanted in here. You're saying 1149, which is about enforcement, to take out the whole section?
No, ma'am. Everything after it would say enforcement. So yeah, 1149D.
Yeah.
Our recommendation would be that it read unlawful removal of a qualifying tree designated in the tree preservation plan for retention will result in a municipal infraction, period.
Oh, and no fine?
Nothing
and
about all
nothing
the
after-
money and
in
the
either,
percentages
okay.
and all that.
Okay. And okay.
Got it written down.
And then the first one was just number 3. It's just a typo. It should say mitigate, not mitigation.
I got that one. Okay. And thank you. That's all I have for now.
Further questions from the council? Frank?
I hate to beat a dead tree, and I do like trees. I didn't quite understand I understood the words you said in response to Ben's question. Are we talking about, when you talk about a tree preservation plan that we're going to operate from, it really is about the buffers and the property, the building envelope for that particular site? If you want to take a 100-year-old tree down, they're going to get to do that. Is that right?
Yes. We're not going to prohibit somebody from building, although what it could do is it may result in somebody shifting their building a little one way or a little the other way. Let's say that you want to develop. One of the things you have to do when you do your landscape plan, you have to do a tree retention plan.
Right.
You have to flag the trees that are qualifying trees.
Right.
Bring it into staff. If you have a building footprint that's going to lose 3 trees or shifting it 10 feet is going to lose 1 tree, then we're going to try to get them to do it so there's only losing 1 tree and not 3.
Right, okay. I think I understand. Okay, thank
But
you.
we're not going to say, this is not intended to say no.
Okay, good.
Steve?
Let me just clarify that, because the way I read that subsection, it's in 11-4-6C. The way I read that, and I think this is, well, I don't know, this is the way I read it, is that you wouldn't let the tree preservation plan or tree retention plan stand in the way of reaching the maximum permitted density. Is that correct?
This is saying that is not the only reason
Yes.
why you should be asking to cut down all the trees.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That is correct.
But that in and of itself is not
No, sir.
going to prevent
No,
you
sir.
from doing what you want to do there.
No, sir.
That's kind of how I read it. Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 23-8, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Anyone wishing to provide public testimony, please approach the podium and your name and address for the record, please. Jim?
Good evening. My name is Jim Ramlow. My address is 316 Summers Avenue. And for the edification of all present, I'm the drafter of the letter. There's just a few comments I want to make about it. You have the letter, and I'm sure you can read it. In fact, I'm rather impressed by your questions. I had similar questions. I just didn't put them all in the letter. First observation is that the existing ordinance is about 1,700 words. The proposed ordinance, according to my spell checker, is about 4,300 words. That's a lot of new legislation. There's a lot of concepts that are thrown into this that are very difficult, I think, to administer and apply. And I think that's why built into 11-4-9B are several standards by which a zoning administrator can grant some kind of permission, variance, I'm not too sure what you'd call it, for removal of trees to make a plan work. But I'm really troubled by the words that are used in this proposed ordinance because I don't know what they mean, and frankly, I don't think you know what they mean. They say undue hardship. That's not a defined term in this document. What is an undue hardship? I don't know. Highest degree possible. What does that mean? Minimum variation needed. What does that mean? Equal or better result. On what standard? On what criteria? None of that's defined. What does that result in? Zoning administrators can have all kinds of different opinions. You've heard one expressed here tonight, but you don't know what the next zoning administrator is going to say. And nothing in this ordinance or proposed ordinance gives you any guidance as to what that next zoning administrator might decide. I made the comment about the difference between subdivision covenants and public ordinances because there's a different paradigm that I encourage you to think about here. When you are a developer putting together a subdivision, that's your property. You can decide what it's going to look like. You can make all kinds of decisions about landscaping, trees, flowers, sidewalks, all those sorts of things. That's your property. We're talking about trees located on people's private property. So we have to think hard about the question of taking. That's why I mentioned that a couple of years ago, the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit decided in a case arising out of Canton, Ohio, that it is possible to go too far in telling people that they have to keep trees on their property. So I do respect the effort that's gone into this. This is a real difficult project. Of anybody in the room here, I appreciate the difficulty of legal drafting. It's hard enough for me drafting documents for private parties. For you folks drafting a document for thousands of people in a community, it's exponentially more difficult, I think. And when that difficulty arises, it's good to step back and ask, what am I trying to accomplish? Why did this document become so lengthy, so complex, have so many difficult to define terms? And maybe one way to look at that question is to say, well, am I trying to accomplish a public safety goal? Am I trying to accomplish an environmental protection goal? Am I trying to accomplish an aesthetic goal? I completely understand and agree with public safety and environmental protection. That is absolutely the role of this city to do those things. But when it comes to aesthetics, about the view that somebody has or the shielding from view that somebody might be looking for, I think you have to be very, very careful in balancing the interests that are involved and pay attention to just how much discretion a zoning administrator is going to apply to those decisions. Another way to look at that is to say, when you're designing regulations, try to design regulations that don't require variances or don't require special arrangements with an administrator, because once that administrator's discretion gets involved, then there's all kinds of problems that can arise. I personally have defended the city on equal protection claims. And they're very difficult to deal with. And the more complex the ordinance, the greater the discretion of the administrator, the more likelihood that there is going to be an equal protection problem, as well as a taking problem in this case. Those are my comments. I appreciate the hard work you guys are doing.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate your comments tonight. Leo.
Hello, Council. I'm Leo Keene, live at 514 Pine Place in Whitefish, and I'm a tree guy. Been here before talking about preserving trees and been on board with the city on some tree problems that we've had. I feel like this is a great opportunity, a great plan, and I really think it is about time. I think we're a tree city. We need to do something that is fairly forceful about preserving what we have here and preserving the beauty. And the trees are adding to the beauty of Whitefish. So, and I feel like the plan has enough flexibility in it that I don't see that there's going to be insurmountable problems arising from trying to enforce it. The fact that it was also reviewed, or 20, I think 20 cities were reviewed with their tree plans, and so we have some experience to fall back on other cities and what they're been able to do and how they're accomplishing this. We're not reinventing the wheel, in other words. It's a tried and true method of preserving our environment, our trees. The one place where I see that there might be an issue is this only pertains to plans that come before the city, and I'm concerned about those that are accomplished before, not plans, but tree removals that's done before the plan even gets to the city. I'll give you two examples. The town pump, which was, a sore spot to me. It wasn't in the city at the time, so I know we did not have any authority over the town pump. It wasn't in the city limits, I believe. However, those trees were removed in the dark of night, as far as I know. One day they were there, the next day they were gone. How do you, unless we had an inventory of those trees ahead of time, how did we even know what was to be preserved? And nothing was preserved. Every tree was taken down. I'll give you another example, the Eagle Lake, another one that really bothers me. All those trees were removed. I don't know if it was ever brought before the city prior to that. I'm not aware of that, but I would like to know if that was another example of tree removal that's done before the city has a chance to review it. What happens in that case? I feel like in order for this to be effective, we pretty much need to start an inventory of what we do have here so that we know when a plan comes, or before a plan comes before the city, that we know what we have and what should be preserved. I didn't hear anything about that in this conversation. Will there be an inventory of the trees that we have within the city so that we can get a little bit ahead of the developments? I am not concerned about the lack of flexibility in this plan. I think we can accomplish the right decisions as they come before the city within this plan. I am all in favor of it, and thank you for having this done. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Leo. Further public comment tonight? Michelle, anyone online? Or Richard? Former Deputy Mayor, welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, councilors. Sorry to be a little bit late to the party in terms of commenting, but I think it's important to comment at this time. I want to start with 11-4-3C, number 16. And it talks about 3-inch caliper trees and being protected from damage, and it says that they have to be protected for 3 years. Well, a 3-inch caliper tree in 3 years is maybe 4 inches in caliper after planting. And my own personal experience with planting trees and seeing trees here in town is that's not enough to protect them from deer, for that, to have that protection around the bole of the tree. So I think that is worth looking at again, is how long you're going to protect a tree. And I think that 3 years, a newly planted tree, 3 years is insufficient. I would draw your attention to 11-4-5A6. This is my chance for show and tell. It talks about mulches, and it doesn't say anything other than mulching. And if you go around anywhere in town, you will see that public landscaping, banks, businesses are all with this bark mulch. This bark mulch, and I think Joe Page, Chief Page, would back me up here, this is nothing but a bed for an ember shower. And once you get winds behind an ember shower, these become lofted firebrands. And these pieces of mulch get spread around the city and doom the houses that have not been adequately protected. So I think this stuff ought to be banned in the entire city, quite frankly. But certainly it ought to be part of anybody's landscaping plan, and part of the landscaping regulations is to prohibit the use of this stuff. It's show and tell. The question, I would hope that you will add something about the viability of the trees that are planted. They must, I think, I'll suggest some wording. Trees must remain viable for a minimum of 3 years or equal to the caliper of the planted tree. 3 inches is an ideal caliper for a newly planted tree. Smaller than that, it's hard for them to survive. Bigger than that, it takes too long for them to establish. For every inch of caliper, it takes one, and university studies, I think, support this. For every inch of caliper, it takes 1 year to establish the root system. So a 3-inch caliper tree, when planted, it takes 3 more years before that root takes effect, and such that the tree becomes viable. So I think you need a viability standard in the regulations. I don't fully understand under WZTA the 23-03, it says, quote, each qualifying tree designated for preservation that has been removed must be replaced with trees totaling at least 2 times the caliper inches that was lost. So if, and I'm happy to be called out on this, but if you cut down a 12-inch tree, this tells me that you have to put a 24-inch tree back. Is that really what that says? But it doesn't compute for me. And finally, the town pump, that's our poster child. The last 2, I was just out there today, the last 2 retention trees, the 2 big trees at the north end of that lot, the last 2 retention trees are dead, and 3 or 4 of the replacements, the pine trees, are dead or dying. And I do not understand how this comports with the proposed revision, but I think what we really need to do is have some teeth in the viability. You can plant a dead tree and say, I planted it, that's good enough, and it's not. I agree with Leo, we are a tree city, and we should do everything we can to prove to the public that we are in fact a tree city. Other than that, I think it's not a bad move, and I like the fact that you've taken all of the various regulations in other areas and combine them into one place, and that's one of the things I suspect that makes it a little more lengthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Always good to be here.
Always good to see you. Nathan?
Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. Didn't plan to speak on this, but the one thing that stuck out to me was, I don't know anything about landscaping, but the removal of the duplexes and triplexes that used to be exempt from the landscaping standards that are now thrown into landscaping standards. And I guess my question would be if anybody feels like redirecting it, why that decision was made, and if there's any concern for workflow, because workload on like Dave and his staff, because as we know, in about 6 months, duplexes are going to be legal to build everywhere in Whitefish due to SB 323, which passed the state and was signed by the governor. I'm going to pretend that we should exceed that standard because duplexes are still pretty expensive here, but that's a different subject for a different day. But just would expect that those are going to be built quite frequently, and that's probably going to be a lot of added work on the staff if I'm interpreting it correctly, but I don't know. So just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Further public testimony this evening? Anyone online, Michelle? I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for preferably a motion one way or another. Giuseppe, and then Steve.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I actually move to postpone indefinitely this matter.
Is there a second? And that motion fails for lack of a second.
Can I ask a couple of questions
Steve.
of staff? Alan, this one is for you. I can't find it, but it seems like there is language in here that says how long a tree must remain viable. Is that correct? Or did I miss that?
I'm looking for it.
Okay. I swear I read it at one point.
There is a lot.
It's a lot of pages.
There is a lot of pages.
And with the town pump, those trees have to remain viable for 5 years. I believe we conditioned that, didn't we? So anything that's dying now has to be replaced. Does that ring a bell? Angie?
I think it's 3 years. I just pulled up a staff report that I'd done, but it's not the official one. You guys might have changed it to 5, but I have 3 years noted.
Okay. It still hasn't been 3 years yet.
Yeah, I count.
I'm trying to find the actual section, but of course, when I'm standing in front of you, it gets trickier.
To your recollection, there is something in...
3 years, but I can't. I'm just trying to find where it says that.
Okay. And in terms of the caliper replacement, that's a total caliper. So if you cut down a 12-inch tree, you have to replace
Right. You don't have to plant a 24-inch tree. You have to plant 3 or 4 trees of at least that total inches.
So that, yeah, so if you replace it with 4 3-inch trees, you've done
And
your job.
I think that Richard nailed it. Was it Richard? That much of the reason why we have so much more is because we've moved a lot of existing code into this section. It's all in one place now.
Yeah, okay.
Further questions for Alan, Rebecca? Or a motion, please? Sure.
This is for Dave. Dave, could you just, for the public, talk about how we address the term undue hardship, highest degree possible, equal or better results? Because to the public, it sounds kind of subjective, but I think in your job, you use those, you decide things like that all the time. I know on some of the boards I've been on, we have to also look at undue hardship and things like that. So if you could address that to the public.
Yeah, I mean, we have some of this same language in our water quality protection ordinance when it comes to buffering. We allow some buffer averaging and things like that where, existing trees can be potentially, or that buffer can be reduced if it's increased in other areas. And some of it is subjective, and when we're looking at a site plan, and the thing is every single site's different. There might be mitigating circumstances depending on what's on the site, what's adjacent to it, whether they're on a corner lot. There's other things that come into play when someone's developing a lot. It might be steep slopes and other things where it's very difficult to develop without changing the grade of a site, for instance. And if you have to regrade a whole site, then all the trees that need to be graded aren't going to be able to stay there. You're going to have to, plant new trees. So that kind of flexibility is built in. So to the highest degree possible, recognizing that there's extenuating circumstances. That's why we built language in there, just to provide a little more flexibility, knowing that what we were trying to avoid is having every single landscape plan that came to the city have to go through some kind of a process where we have to grant an exemption, to provide enough flexibility to look at it on a site-by-site basis. And so there is some subjective language in there, but it really is going to be, and the majority of the projects that are out there are going to be able to meet these things without any kind of issue whatsoever. But there might be circumstances where we have to take a look at it, and someone's going to have to explain to us, the reason why they have to, modify some things that maybe don't quite fit exactly with the regulations.
Thank you. And my second question is Angie, who's going to start talking anyways, but it was about takings, if you could explain that.
Sure, I can. And Rebecca, what I wanted to say first was if Dave makes a decision that someone disagrees with, they can appeal to the Board of Adjustment. So it's up to Dave, but there is an appeal process built into the statute. As far as takings goes, the case that Jim referenced is out of the Sixth Circuit. We're not in the Sixth Circuit. I think there was some factual distinctions with that case. There was a ditch that intersected, and forgive me, I got it at like 3:30, so I haven't had a chance to do a lot of legal research on it. But there was a ditch that intersected county property, and the county wouldn't clear out this debris, these dead trees. And so they did themselves without getting a tree permit. So I think it's factually distinctional. Could it be considered a takings if we went too far? Yeah, I agree with Alan that he did a lot of research. I think this is very comparable to other cities' tree or landscaping requirements. And, Alan and I had a good conversation, and I agree with him that this is probably less arduous than a lot of cities are. So could we be sued for takings? Yes, as you guys well know, we can be sued for anything. But I have a certain degree of comfort with Montana's taking law, so.
Thank you. Then I'd be happy to make a motion.
Please.
Oops, I say
Can
that.
I follow up with Alan really quickly? Did you find the section?
Yes, sir. There's two things, basically.
Okay.
The first one talks about, there's three different things. One of them talks about any tree that's been designated on the tree preservation plan for retention can't die. If it dies, it has to be replaced, or you have to replace it too. The second thing talks about performance guarantees once you put the landscaping in. It has to be 18 months is what's required. That was based on what our arborist gave us. There was a third, and there's language basically in the maintenance that says you can't let your landscaping die. And if you let your landscaping die, then it's a municipal infraction. So I don't have 3 years in there.
So there's no time
No, you
limit
just can't let
set
your
on-
landscaping die. If it's approved on your landscaping plan, then it's a zoning violation if you let it die.
Okay.
Giuseppe?
Yes, this is for either Alan or David. What's the urgency to pass the ordinance tonight versus a month or 2 months from now? Meaning, I'm hearing public comments for the ordinance and public comments that is perplexed about the ordinance. And some of those comments are raising points that I'm not sure I'm able to address responsibly. What Mr. Dugan said, I had not considered it. Some of the things Jim said, I did not consider. So honestly, my question is there some trigger or some urgency for the ordinance, technically? I'm not suggesting that we table or anything. I'm just asking what is the pros and cons versus approving it tonight or waiting like we did for the WBT zoning that took us 1 year to get to jail it.
I don't think there's a necessary urgency. It is a council goal. We had stated in our council goals for this particular year that we would be done by a certain time period, and we're getting right up there to that. But, other than that, I think if the council wants us to make some additional changes, we're happy to do that, or you guys, can adopt it tonight as is, whatever you guys want to do.
Rebecca?
I'm sorry to say this, but I don't know the.
23-8.
Thank you.
And this does take a supermajority of those present, so it will require 4 voting in the affirmative.
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 23-8 with 2 revisions.
Those being?
Those being 11-4-1, change to mitigate on line 3, and 11-4-9 under administration, it should read as, D is enforcement, unlawful removal of a qualifying tree designated in the tree preservation plan for retention will result in a municipal infraction, period, and eliminate the rest.
Thank you, Rebecca. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilor Cornell. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I'd like to make a friendly amendment if I
Yeah.
could.
Yep.
In 11-4-2, where it reads, unless otherwise noted, the provisions of this chapter apply to all districts and to all uses except single-family dwellings. I would like to include multifamily dwellings in that. I don't know if there's a way to limit it to duplexes or if multifamily includes everything. up to a
Multifamily is 3 or
duplex.
more units. So anything that's 3 or more is a multifamily. So if you wanted to exempt like duplexes,
Yeah,
then you could say applies to everything except single-family dwellings and duplexes.
okay. I would like to
Which-
exempt duplexes from this ordinance as well. That's my friendly amendment.
What's the section again, Steve?
It's section 11-4-2, sentence A.
We'll act on the friendly amendment first to 11-4-2. Is there a second? I just was about to ask, is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Davis.
I just think that by exempting duplexes, it does requiring, well, duplexes are our next step up from apartment complexes in terms of affordability in this town. And if we can exempt them from the major pieces of this landscaping requirement, then we can possibly save people some money and make duplex building a little more affordable. So
Thanks, Steve.
that's my.
We'll vote on the friendly amendment first before the original motion. All those in favor of amending section 11-4-2, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does.
I said yes.
So that would fail. That would fail on a lack of a supermajority vote for the friendly amendment, which brings us back to the original motion. That is correct, Angie. Or is that gray?
I don't think it needs to be a supermajority.
Yeah,
don't
but
know
on
about-
amendment,
For a
I don't think
friendly
it does.
amendment.
Yeah, I don't think it.
I don't think it does have to be. You're amending.
Yeah, it's only on the main
Yeah, if you're
motion.
amending the ordinance, yeah. Yeah, you don't have to.
Does it require a supermajority? So that motion does fail on the friendly amendment. Which brings us back to the original motion for approval. Further discussion or comments?
Yeah.
Giuseppe?
Okay. So I've been on the tree committee twice during my volunteer years with the city, and I think trees are hugely important to our community, and people, it's the one thing that I saw when I moved here 27 years ago, people get so upset when we lose them. And so I'm so pleased to see the level of detail that you put into this and that you reached out to so many other municipalities to find out what was the norm and how they protected trees. I'm more than happy to exclude single-family homes, and unfortunately duplexes are left out. But I am really excited that we're finally getting this done, and I really appreciate your work, Alan, to make that happen. So I'm an enthusiastic yes.
Thanks, Rebecca. Giuseppe?
Yes, I'm just concerned that we are trying to do the right thing while doing a little bit of band-aiding like Steve was trying to do with his motion, and you did with your, friendly amendment, so you did with your friendly amendment. I still believe that we could do a little bit more homework, all of us. Alan has done a great job. I don't feel very prepared to put a new chunk of code into our city code with all these patch kind of discussion. For that reason, at this moment, I'll vote against it.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Further comments? I'll just say this has been a council goal for a number of years. I want to thank staff for bringing this forward. Alan, I think you did an exceptional job working on this ordinance, and I think the general public's going to certainly appreciate it and embrace that we're taking this seriously. It's been modeled off multiple municipalities. It's been peer reviewed, and I've been up here long enough to know that regulations out of the gate are never perfect the first time, but in my opinion, let's put this thing in play, and if we need to do text amendments down the road, once we learn how it's working or not working, we can certainly do that in the future. So I'm certainly in favor of this ordinance personally myself this evening. Further comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry on a 4-1 vote with Giuseppe voting in opposition. Thank you, Alan. That moves us on to item 8 of our agenda, and we will consider Resolution 23-6, a resolution granting a utility easement to Flathead Electric Cooperative over land located at Lot 6 of Baker's Common, Phase 2 subdivision, Section 1, Township 31 North, Range 22 West, in Flathead County, Montana. Angie.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This will be the shortest staff report I will ever read you.
I think it is the shortest.
I know, right? I believe there's some representatives of FEC that are here that can probably explain it in more detail, so I appreciate you guys being here. So basically, the FEC has requested that the city allow it to extend a 3-phase electrical service phase. Sorry, I have no idea what this means. And anyway, they might infringe on the city's property a bit. So as you guys know, anytime that the city grants an easement, we do have to take it through council. It is considered an interest in property. I'm not sure exactly how far it will extend. FEC did draft the easement. We checked the property line, and basically it would just be an easement on either side of this electrical service. So I don't know that I have the knowledge to answer your questions, but FEC might, if you have them.
Thanks, Angie. Stan Plude, do you have anything to add? Thank you for joining us. Yes, just name and address for the record, please. Appreciate your time tonight.
Good evening. Stan Pluid with Flathead Electric. Exactly, she explained it very well. The easement is what's called a limited easement. Wherever the line does get installed, and the idea is to keep it close to the property line. Then the easement is, I believe, 10 feet on each side of the line as installed is a description on it. In order to get back to the corner where the 3-phase transformer goes, which was correct again, the best way is to come around onto the city property instead of trying to get under the pavement. And I believe in that southeast corner there's some drainage on the property there. So it's really not a good area where we would want to go on that property through that drainage area right there, where we can go a little bit south onto that city area there. It's kind of a green space, I guess you would call it, that area in between the parking lot there and the property to the north. So it's not like a buildable area, I guess you would say. So that's what the proposal is.
Thanks, Stan. Any questions for Stan? Frank?
I'm having a hard time with the way this map is laid out. So is this easement that we might grant going to affect in any form or fashion any current paving or rights of way that we use?
No. If you look at the map out by the street, there's what's called a 3-phase junction can. And basically the proposal, and I think the best way to handle this, would be to directionally bore this area. It's not going to be easy just to dig it. But what they do when they do a directional bore, they take what's called a vac truck, and they basically vacuum out an area in front of the equipment, And then they also do the same on the other end on the other property. And then they bore directionally through the ground and around, and they locate the end of the bore, and then they follow it, and they'll come to that point where it's been potholed or opened up, and that's where they'll come in, and then they'll tie into that equipment. So I think it'll be a clean way to do it, and there should not be any damage to any paved areas or anything like that. And the landscape area where the junction can and whatnot is can be repaired when that's done. And typically, with something that's going on with the city like that, we make sure it's inspected, and also if you would have Craig or someone in your department take a look at it too, to meet their approval before we proceed with it. We try not to create any messes left. We want it cleaned up, back to the way it was, and just kind of meets everybody's standards before we proceed forward with it.
Thanks, Stan. Further questions? Not seeing any. Thanks, Stan.
Okay.
I would entertain a motion to approve item 9A, which is resolution 8A, 23-6.
Make a motion to approve resolution 23-6, a resolution granting a utility easement to Flathead Electric Cooperative.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks for coming tonight, Stan. Yep, you bet. We'll move on to item 9, communication from our city manager, Dana Smith. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana on her update? Dana, anything additional to report on?
Well, I thought I'd just share a little bit about my time in Billings. I met
please.
with other city managers, the Montana League of Cities and Towns as well, to just discuss the legislative session that has wrapped up. And it was a very good meeting. In fact, learned a little bit about how Senate Bill 382, which is the new zoning reform bill, how that actually impacts other bills that were adopted. For example, Senate Bill 528 would not necessarily apply if you go and work under Senate Bill 382. You'll have to select options, but you don't have to necessarily follow the rules that they've identified in there. Whitefish being one of 3 second-class cities to implement that. That will be done through our growth policy update. We'll be working on that. I think that was a little bit interesting. Wasn't aware of that until then. Really, we discussed a lot of, how do we prepare for the future, because we envision that this will continue to be get more difficult. Looking at modernization of tax increment financing, tax reform, doing something in the interim to actually come forward with a proposal, and working with certain entities like the Montana Infrastructure Coalition. Also looking at land use items that might be brought up. And the league really needs more help at the session, and they'll be looking at increasing their dues to get more of them there. It was, I think, really difficult for Kelly and Thomas to be able to tackle all the bills that they had to go speak to. But then I did ask in that same sentence was, is it better for cities to have their own lobbyists versus just relying on the league? And I think that they definitely appreciate the support. A lot of the larger cities do have lobbyists. Actually, Kalispell does not, but I know that they're considering for the next session. Helena did not, and they are also going to be considering it for the next session as well. So I think you're going to see more cities attempt to have lobbyists. Our lobby firm was Turner Strategies. Robin took a job in Washington, D.C., so she is no longer our lobbyist. Our contract was done at the end of session, but we will have to go out and look for a new lobbyist come for the 2025 session. So with that, though, I do have good news on Senate Bill 301, which was the Lakeshore Regulations Bill, where they were grandfathering in certain docks and so forth. The governor vetoed that bill, and so that is one less bill that we have to address, which is great. As we get through, I'll be able to, the governor is still considering signing certain bills, including 382, 245, and a few other ones that we have on our list. So hopefully by June 5th, I'll be able to get a big picture. Here's all the bills that pass and what we have, maybe more in a spreadsheet format, maybe not with as much description about the process, but what the bills do in general. So with that, I think the only other thing that we discussed was looking at really building relationships with our legislators before the next session. And so, you know, I think we've had a great experience with Representative Fern, but whoever we may have fill Senator Regeer's spot in the future, you know, trying to build relationships in advance and really giving them a like, here's city budgets, here's what we do at the city, because a lot of them I think don't have and governmental budgeting for municipalities is difficult to understand. That's why I think property taxes were attacked a lot this session. And when people say, oh, my values are going up, that means my taxes are going up, that's not true. It's not the same increase. We are limited by the state already, and a lot of that is hard to explain and comprehend because the formula is somewhat complicated. So hopefully through some tax reform, we'll be able to address the need for really a statewide sales tax, maybe less reliance on property tax, given Montana is the second highest tourism state in the United States, second to Hawaii. So with that, I think that's all the updates I have for you today. We did get the budget out, and it's on your desk with the CIP as well, and that's all. That's all. That's it, yeah. And we will
Lainey's rolling her eyes.
meet. Yeah. Lainey did a fantastic job and was a huge help. It literally allowed me to go to Billings. Had I not had her, I would not have been able to make that trip over there. So with that, I think that's all I have. Our budget meeting, just a reminder, we have one coming up on May 30th. It'll be before the next council meeting, so May 30th we will have a budget work session.
Thanks, Dana. Who would like to begin tonight with comments? Rebecca.
First thing is for Craig, the Spokane Avenue remodeling. I got a notice because I have a space on Spokane, and it said that they're going to start resurfacing on May 30th. It will be going from Safeway to the Firebrand. It will be done at nighttime from 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. and travelers can expect 10 to 15-minute delays. If the city's work for utility installation and weather allows that. So I wanted to ask, how are we doing on our part? And then I had one other question too.
Yeah, so is the question, how is the city water main installation coming along, or is the question about the MDT timing and the night work?
Probably both.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, so as far as the water main installation goes, we're ahead of schedule. We're behind the schedule that we thought we were going to hit about 2 weeks ago, but we still anticipate being completed about a week before that May 30th date. Which will allow MDT to come in and do their resurfacing. They talked to staff kind of throughout the water main project and discussed doing their project at night, and we didn't see an issue with it. The justification for doing the work at night, although it will be more of a nuisance to the residents that are directly adjacent to the work, but it'll take the work from about 2 to 2.5 weeks down to 4 or 5 days. So we thought that it made sense.
They'll have one lane open during the nighttime also? Or
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, they will still, as far as I understand it, do the project under traffic, under, one lane two-way traffic.
And then the other question, I walked down to the corner of 5th and where we have the school crossing, and one of the problems is those flashing light things always had a big buffer that had a snowdrift that you couldn't reach it easily. I don't know if we have any say over this, but it'd be really nice if they did a concrete cutout around it so anybody in a wheelchair could just ride up and push it easily, or any child on a bike could push it easily, so that we could keep it free during the winter. Do we negotiate that, or do I call them, or do you have any input on that?
You know, it really becomes just like property owners are responsible for the sidewalk adjacent to their home, they're also responsible for maintaining the snow on the corners if you're a corner lot. And so the way that those activated signals are designed, there is concrete right up to them. It's just a matter of a lack of snow removal around them.
I think there might be grass, like a 3.5-foot grass. Anyways, would you maybe have time to look at it, make sure that
so those intersections are being reconstructed to meet current ADA standards, and so they will have concrete right up to the bases.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I just want to make sure it's not a done deal. Okay, thank you. The second thing is we got an award of being the safest city in Montana. So I don't know if Dana wanted to say something about it, but congratulations, Bridger and Joe. Do you want to talk about how that's done? Bridger or Dana?
We were just notified that we were determined to be the safest city in Montana for 2023. We've often been in the top 5 list thanks to our awesome police force. Although Bridger will tell you it's not always great to be number 1, because as soon as you drop from number 1, it looks bad. And so top 5 is great. That's what we're going to focus on. We shoot for number 3, yeah, middle of the top 5.
I think it's great no matter what you think. Okay, thank you for the hard work. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up was we got a letter from a person that's been very active in our community about Bozeman, writing a letter of support for Zoe Zephyr, who is a trans woman that was elected to represent Missoula voters in the House of Representatives, and she got sanctioned and then removed from the House, had to vote out in the hallway because she became emotional during her testimony, and she was silenced, and so they wrote something specific to that. And so we're nonpartisan up here, but I wanted to review with the with our attorney. We have a long history of pretty strong civil rights activism, I would say, to make sure that everybody is equally protected and welcome here. And so I asked Angie to kind of review what our current non-discrimination ordinance says, because it specifically includes lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transsexual individuals. And so I wanted to make an effort to include people in our community and visitors in a formal way. So Angie, I just wanted to give you a moment.
Sure. So we passed our non-discrimination ordinance, I believe it was in 2015 or 2016. I know it just started. And basically why we did that is that at that time, Montana law did not specifically protect sexual orientation or gender identity as a protected class. That has since changed to a certain extent. There was a United States Supreme Court case back in 2020 which did recognize sexual orientation or gender identity as a protected class. So the Montana Human Rights Bureau has since also recognized it and will take complaints. So that was kind of the intent when we passed it. It prohibits basically discrimination in employment, in public accommodations, in housing, and prohibits retaliation. So it does make a violation of civil remedy But kind of the process that we go through is it's first submitted to the Montana Human Rights Bureau. And if they refuse to prosecute it, or if it's an area that they do not recognize as a protected class, the person can file an action in municipal court. They can seek civil remedies, injunctive relief, attorney's fees, and other relief. We have never, for the record, we have never actually had anybody file a complaint. But Rebecca and I talked a little bit today, and I think at the time it was important for us as a city to formally recognize that we're inclusive of everyone. We have done that in the past with resolutions. I think there maybe even wasn't an ordinance, those were before my time. We did it when Richard Spencer saluted Trump, and we had the Nazi troll storm. So it does still exist. Again, it's never been used, and it may be kind of superfluous at this point, given the fact that the Montana Human Rights Bureau is now recognizing sexual orientation and gender identity as a protected class. And I'd be very interested to see if they've prosecuted or investigated any. I haven't checked.
Thank you for the level of detail, and thanks for reminding. Basically, I just wanted to remind our community where we've come from and what we stand for, and that we are about diversity and inclusion and respect for everybody's individuality. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ben?
Thanks for bringing that up, Rebecca, and I agree. I just want to make a comment on our work session from earlier. I felt that was a very interesting and informative discussion. I also felt like it was an area where we're going to have more discussions. I was wondering if you might kind of comment on what the future looks like for us to adopt these new fees, and what's going to happen there.
So the consultant will continue to work with the Impact Fee Advisory Committee. Once that process is done, based on the work session we had tonight, I would say we're going to have a work session before adopting the report. Now, when you adopt the report, we actually prepare an ordinance adopting that report. And then it would be another, until that ordinance goes into effect, we'll simultaneously, with the second reading, adopt the new fees, or at least within the 30 days of the second reading, adopt new fees to go along with those changes. So it's going to be still a few-month process for that to occur, but I do see benefit of having another work session before you guys have to adopt the report.
Thanks for asking that, Ben. Anything further? Frank?
Nothing for me tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Steve?
Thanks, Rebecca, for bringing that up. I appreciate that. I agree with you. Craig, I just had one question for you. When we were getting all that rain about a week ago in between the two heat waves, a friend of mine mentioned that he was walking by the Dick Anderson construction property on the river there by River Bend Apartments, and that they were pumping water directly out of the basements in their construction zone right onto the Whitefish Trail. So I didn't get any pictures of it. I trust that that he saw what he saw, but just something to keep in mind if we get another rain event, that they might be pumping their stormwater into the public right-of-way.
Yeah, we've had some concerns raised about that project and some ponding that's occurring on that section of the BNSF Loop Trail, and we'll be addressing it.
Okay, thank you. And the only other thing is just another plug for the Whitefish Trail Challenge. If you're out there and you have Strava, join the Whitefish Legacy Partners Hit the Trail group and earn some money for the trails. We have 2 weeks left.
Thank you, Steve. Giuseppe?
Yes, I hiked the trails and I keep doing it. That's my only comment.
Thanks, Giuseppe. I had a couple things, although you asked many of the questions I had. Thank you. Dana, are we meeting on July 3rd, the day before the 4th of July?
Technically, that's the council meeting date because City Hall is open that day, closed the 4th.
It is open on the 3rd. Mm-hmm. Okay. Craig, I don't mean to continue to harper on this, but the landscaping on East Edgewood between Wisconsin and Texas, are we looking at the final product? I know that we had discussed hiring a landscape architect to do some additional buffering, mounding, shielding, and it doesn't really look like we did much there.
Yeah, there were a couple properties where we worked with the homeowners to do individualized landscaping plans. One of them's actually sitting right next to you. I don't know if the final product meets their expectations, but the seating in general has been a disaster out there. We just met with the contractor for the project, along with the subcontractor that did the seating, and we have a plan in place that we'll be working on over the next couple weeks to try and get some of that seed to germinate, add more seed, do some weed mitigation. But yeah, no, we're definitely not done out there.
Okay, thanks for keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, and there was an email update that went out to all the property owners on East Edgewood as part of that, the plan that we're putting in place, so they should be aware of the fact that we're still working on it.
Okay, great, thanks. I believe it was Richard or Leo that brought up the tree mortality at town pump. We're clearly not outside the 3-year window for warranting those trees. Can we send an enforcement letter or our code enforcement officer out there to enforce our condition?
So I just checked with Maria via email because we're so far away, but I remember her staff reaching out because I've had individuals call me actually about it, and they reached out last fall, didn't get a response. I'll make sure to follow up with our contacts this week to have them follow through.
Okay.
So, yep.
I've been seeing some horse activity on the Wisconsin bike path, and I don't mind that at all. I know it's a permitted use, I guess, but do they need to pick up after the horses?
I imagine they should, as would any dog owner.
Yeah. Okay, well, they're not. I biked it. I biked it today, so just keep an eye on that if you don't mind. It's not very sightly. Sorry, Frank. On Wisconsin Avenue? I wanted to acknowledge Alan and Laney tonight. I don't think we've ever publicly acknowledged you as a council, but I think you guys are doing terrific work, and you've been just a great addition to what's already an incredible staff as witnessed here tonight with the crowning by the royalty. So just wanted to welcome you and just say that we appreciate you on behalf of the entire council, and keep up the good work. And that goes to all of you. You're an exceptional staff, and we're very lucky to have you. So thank you very much for everything that you do. And that's certainly all I had. Dana, anything further from staff? Council? We are adjourned. Thank you. What's that?